And in terms of questions, this is meant to be very informal. So please, I think there's a raise hand feature, if I'm not mistaken. So if you have questions anywhere along the way, please just use the raise hand feature. If I don't see you, one of my colleagues will shout out to me. You can also drop questions in the chat if you have them, and we'll be monitoring that as well. Other folks, may interject here and there as I'm speaking, and that's totally fine. Again, this is meant to be very conversational, even though I'm doing like a slideshow. It's not meant to be very formal. So, with that, we'll get into it. Um, so, what is integrated resource planning? Integrated resource planning, or IRP, is a process that happens every 3 years. It's a process whereby Entergy regulators and utility stakeholders determine the optimal mix of resources to meet emerging demand over the next 20 years. These resources can be divided into two broad categories. Those would be supply side resources, and that would be things like new generation, a power plant, a solar farm, something along those lines, and then demand side resources. Um, so that would be technologies that are implemented where the customer is, such as energy efficiency. Um, so just to give you kind of the current landscape of what Entergy's current generation mix is, um, you can see this sort of pie chart here. And you'll see right off the bat that we are heavily, heavily dependent on fossil gas for our generation needs. And this is obscured somewhat uh, when you look at this pie chart because you only see gas on here next to legacy gas, which you see only accounts for 3%. But you also have to factor in the orange CCCT, which is combined cycle gas turbines. Um, you also have to factor in the CT Rice generation, as well as their purchase power agreements, which are contracts that Entergy signs with third-party power producers, and many of those contracts are based on fossil gas generation. So when you add all of those up, uh, it leaves us dependent on fossil gas for 58% of our generation needs in New Orleans. And we'll get into why that's bad for us as ratepayers in a little bit. But you'll also see we have a pretty solid dependence on nuclear power at 31%. And then solar energy accounts for just 6% of our current power supply. So you'll see, renewables currently are not a significant portion of Entergy New Orleans generation mix. Um, Moving on. The way that integrated resource planning works is that we run models, or Entergy, I should say, runs models to look at a variety of scenarios and strategies and combining those scenarios and strategies together to get various outcomes. So, what are scenarios? Scenarios are possible futures. So, these are things like market conditions, higher or lower adoption of electric vehicles, um, early retirement of fossil gas generation units, the emergence of renewable energy projects, things like this. Um, then we also have what are called strategies, and these are policies or programs that the regulator can require and the utility can implement that put parameters around our, generation mix and around the way that we meet customer demand. Those can be things like energy efficiency goals, renewable energy standards, and other sort of policy constraints. Um, this chart shows you the various types of generation that were considered in this round of IRP planning. So you see the various types of gas generation. One that I would like to highlight, and we'll talk about a little bit later, is the one at the very top, which is aeroderivative generation, which is a fuel flexible form of combustion generation that can use either fossil gas or hydrogen, which is something that Entergy has been very keen on in this round of IRP planning. And again, we'll talk a little bit later about why that can be a concern for us as ratepayers. So these are the sort of outcomes that came out of the modeling of these various scenarios and strategies. And you see that the models are recommending a really heavy dependence on wind, which is, we know one of the cheapest forms of generation and getting cheaper all the time. Um, of course, the IRP planning process doesn't consider things like the federal landscape of and leasing offshore wind and that sort of thing. This is purely looking at costs. And so these various portfolios show you what these models are recommending by combining these various strategies and scenarios. So in terms of demand side management again are things that reduce customer demand for electricity. These can be things like weatherization and insulation, more efficient AC and heating, more efficient appliances, um, smart meters, smart thermostats, battery storage, various technologies. Penny, I see your hand.
Sorry, could you go back to that last slide? And so how are you're saying like the first circle on the left from those I mean, I get these are different scenario strategy combinations, but then like from the first one, from that, they get DS, DSM, demand side management. How do, are those connected?
Yes.
Hey,
So, oh, go ahead, Logan.
hey, the purpose of the kind of bubbles down at the bottom is just to identify what resources the colors in the donuts above represent. In the down selected portfolios piece
Oh,
was part of Entergy's original presentation, but it didn't include what those circle colors actually represented. And so we created a way so that you could see what it was actually representing above. Sorry for the confusion.
it's a legend.
That's right.
Okay.
Correct. So under this round of IRP planning, Entergy performed its own demand side management potential study. Um, Typically, or not typically, but in past IRP cycles, I should say, the council, including in the last round of IRP planning, the council conducted its own independent demand side management potential study. In this round of IRP planning, they declined to do that. And so we had only Entergy's uh, uh, potential study to rely on. The next technical conference under this docket, which is going to take place on February 27th, is going to pertain to energy efficiency programming, particularly our Energy Smart program. And so this is that pro, and we'll talk a little bit later about this, but that meeting will, be significant in terms of what our demand side management and energy efficiency programming will look like for the next few years. Oh, and here's the slide. To just say a little bit about Energy Smart, this is our citywide energy efficiency program, and our council has been sort of taking a piecemeal approach to approving programming and approving programming in sort of fits and starts. And This is a problem for our energy efficiency providers, the contractors who actually provide these services, because the lead times for a lot of these projects can be longer than the time that is being approved for programming. And so they are left in a sort of situation where they're unsure if funding is going to continue to be available for these programs. And we've been urging the council to make more long-term decisions about energy efficiency programming. As I mentioned, the next technical conference under the docket on February 27th will be specifically about this program. So talking about the scenarios that we mentioned before, these were the scenarios that were considered in this round of IRP planning. You'll see that scenario 3 is what's called the stakeholder scenario. So this is a scenario that was put together by the various stakeholders who are not Entergy, namely the Alliance for Affordable Energy, the City Office of Resilience and Sustainability, and who else was with us in this docket, Logan? Um,
The Southeast Renewable Energy Alliance, which is an industry association, and some of our friends at Energy Futures Group, Sierra Club, and the Office of Resilience and Sustainability. Sorry if I've said things twice for you.
No, no, thank you. Um, so you'll see the scenario that the stakeholders recommended looked at high energy growth as a future at high future natural gas prices. We looked at early deactivation of fossil gas generation, low cost renewables. We're looking at a future where there's uh, aggressive expansion of electricity demand, namely due to electrification and the adoption of electric vehicles, and also decreasing capital costs for renewable projects. And then here you see the various planning strategies that were recommended. And again, if you look at the fourth one, this is the stakeholder strategy, which was largely based on the city's climate action plan. So, looking at meeting the goals and targets of the climate action plan that the current administration developed. Um, so again, combining these various scenarios and strategies is how we get the outcomes that we saw before. So in terms of some of the policy constraints that affect the outcome, in 2021, our city council, following the advocacy of the Energy Future New Orleans Coalition, adopted a renewable and clean portfolio standard, which requires Entergy to meet an escalating percentage of the energy they sell using clean energy technologies and renewable energy technologies. And Entergy is required to file annual compliance reports under that renewable portfolio standard. What you see in this chart that I stole straight from Entergy's presentation is that the compliance with the renewable and clean portfolio standard consistently achieves the lowest cost generation for in terms of meeting supply costs. That is the cost to build or new generation to meet new demand. And so what that tells us is that renewables, again, are the cheapest form of generation available, and that this policy is help guiding us toward more affordable energy for the future. We talked a little before about gas and our, heavy reliance on fossil gas for generation. The chart on the left is from the Energy Information Administration via Bloomberg, and it is just kind of a snapshot of the volatility of natural gas prices over time. And Logan pointed out to me that it doesn't have actual prices on it. It just has the percentage change. And the price would be helpful to see. But I really included it just so that you can see the enormous fluctuation in the price of fossil gas. And because fuel costs for a utility like Entergy are a straight pass-through to ratepayers, the cost of fossil gas is really not a concern for them because that gets passed directly onto you through the fuel surcharge on your bill. Um, and so, um, our heavy reliance on fossil gas for generation means that we are subject to this volatility. And, just a couple of summers ago, we saw, gas prices reaching upward of $11 per MMBTU, which had enormous effects on people's bills. And these swings can be entirely unpredictable. They can hinge on world events that, happen around the globe and, are completely unforeseen. And that those spikes, then hit your bill in a very hard way. If you look at the chart on the right, these are the future cases that we use for modeling in this round of IRP planning. One is the reference case, and then one is the high case, which is the case that the stakeholders recommended in terms of future gas prices. And what you see, obviously, is just a consistent upward trend. So we know that gas is going to just continue to get more and more expensive, and that volatility, like we mentioned on the left, is not going away either. Um, so again, I mentioned hydrogen before, and this sort of aeroderivative technology that Entergy seems to be very keen on. Their modeling anticipates hydrogen co-firing or even 100% hydrogen generation, but it includes no estimate of future hydrogen fuel costs. And again, because these fuel costs are direct pass through to you, the fact that they are not, telling us what this is going to cost is a huge concern in terms of meeting future need through this technology. So the next steps of the IRP are the public meeting, which is not on February 26th. It is February 18th. I don't know.
It has actually been moved to February 26th. Sorry.
Oh, has it been changed?
It has.
Oh, wow. Okay, breaking news. So that meeting then will be on February 26th. Is it still at 10 a.m.?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and that will be in council chambers. Um, then we have again the next technical conference in the docket on, I believe, February 27th or 8th. Um, Formal intervener comments are due March 10th. Entergy will file reply comments to the intervener comments on April 28th. The council's utility advisors will file their report to the council on June 2nd. Um, Entergy will file its Energy Smart Plan on June 16th. And then it will be in the council's hands to take some action after that date.
And
Uh,
Jesse, can you tell folks the difference between the public meeting and the technical meeting?
Yes. So the technical meeting is intended for intended for formal interveners in the docket only, and each one pertains to a particular issue in the planning process. I believe that people who are non-interveners are allowed to sit in, but they're not allowed to participate in terms of presenting or asking questions or things like that. The public meeting is intended for people who are both interveners and non-interveners to have participation in this process. And as this next slide shows, um, uh, that hasn't always been the case. In fact, it was the Alliance's advocacy back in 2018 that got a change to the city's integrated resource planning rules so that we do have public meetings where non-interveners are allowed to weigh in. And now I'm seeing that we have the wrong date on this slide. But again, that date should be February 26th for that public meeting, which has now been changed. So this will again will be your opportunity to comment on this process and again what kind of energy future you would like to see for New Orleans. And with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions that there might be.
Thanks so much, Jesse. It looks like we've got one question in the chat from Lane. Lane, if you want to come off, you feel free. Otherwise, happy to read it out loud.
I'm basically just asking, how does I suddenly thought about the recent sale of Entergy Gas, as far as I understand it, Entergy Gas business. How does that affect all of this?
Well, because they no longer have that demand load for their gas service, this really is looking at meeting the electric demand side of the business. Logan, you look like you want to do something.
But they're going to have to buy their gas from, I can't think of the name of the hedge fund that bought them.
Bernard.
Yeah, thank you.
Barnard, yeah. So the gas that Entergy purchases for generating electricity doesn't come from the retail gas, which is that Bernard that just purchased the gas part of Entergy New Orleans. Entergy New Orleans purchases the gas that it uses to run its gas plants on the wholesale market. But the way in which the gas sale does impact all of this is that Entergy has been pretty clear already that they intend to go full throttle with electrification. Now, that's good news in terms of overall emissions. But what it also means is that it will likely impact the demand, the load, the need for electricity, and I would argue, therefore, the need to move to more efficient electrified resources. Sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
No, thank you for that, Logan. Uh, any other questions?
Yeah, we've got three more in the chat. Looks like Ned has a question about the hydrogen mix and potential problems.
Yeah, so to say a little bit about hydrogen, so this is being touted as sort of you might hear various colors attached to hydrogen, such as blue hydrogen or green hydrogen. Um, what that means is blue hydrogen is fossil gas. It's fossil gas refined into hydrogen using an enormous amount of energy in the process, and is not an efficient way of creating fuel. Green hydrogen would be creating hydrogen using renewable energy, and is slightly better, but is not really a viable technology at the moment. So, in terms of planning on this sort of co-firing or even 100% generation using hydrogen without having any idea of what this is going to cost, um, and knowing that, if it's coming from blue hydrogen, that it's really not better than burning fossil gas, then that is an issue for ratepayers and for climate purposes as well.
Do you mind if I add a couple more risks? And then I know that Jay has some good stuff to say about it, but I just dropped a paper in the chat down there about some of the risks that an organization called Energy Innovation made recommendations about what utility regulators should be looking out for in terms of utilities' proposals to co-fire or blend hydrogen into the sort of fossil methane mix. And some of them relate to, I mean, if we don't know already where the renewable energy is coming from, then we don't know how expensive that renewable energy is going to be or how expensive the gas is going to be, and therefore add additional layers of effort and work to that, it's only going to be more expensive than gas. In addition to the worse local air quality issues associated with NOx and burning hydrogen. So it's really about the risks associated with the costs that are just ignored in Entergy's IRP. But that said, I think I'm going to hand it over to Jay, who's got a couple of questions. Uh-oh, Jay, you're on mute. Jay, you're on mute. Can you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. There you go.
Oh, sorry. If I were to go and take advantage of my 2 minutes, which is not a whole lot of time, can I submit for the record or to the council members in attendance a expanded copy of my remarks, and would that be entered into the process in some meaningful way?
Absolutely. There's nothing in the IRP rule or in the council's rules that says that what is handed to them on paper has to be something that you could read within 2 minutes. So it would absolutely be part of the process. Yes.
Okay. I've already sent it to the 5 members that I know, so we're off to a little bit of a start. My second question is, I wasn't aware of these compliance reports. Are those up on the web somewhere? I'd sure like to see those.
Sure. I'll drop the link to the Renewable and Clean Portfolio Standard website that we have on our website, that you can see all of those documents in the chat.
Okay, that'd be great. In terms of comments, I would say, number one, just looking at this, if this plan is adopted, we're throwing in the towel on climate change, which would be very ironic for the city of New Orleans. And the reason for it is they use their Aurora model, which most utilities use, but the results that we see are only as good as the inputs that they put into it. So at every point, they have a bias for gas and against solar. If you look at the inputs to the model and compare their inputs with, say, EIA and the National Renewable Energy Lab, they're much more pessimistic about both of those. And the irony is that, I've always viewed Southern Company as the biggest issue because they've fought climate change harder than anybody else. But they're out there now with battery energy storage systems, and they're going full guns, pairing it with solar and using it to make the grid more efficient. And they mention battery storage, but they don't really highlight it in any way. So that is a big thing, and it goes back to the 2017 fiasco on the Michoud plant, because the issue really wasn't paid actors. It was that they just ignored battery options and provided the council with inaccurate information about how batteries worked at that time. They obviously work better now. So I wouldn't accept anything that they produce out of their model because it's based on bad inputs. And I think those need to be challenged as much as they can. Now, on gas, there's several ways that they do it. Finally, in the chat room, I asked them who their consultants were on doing the projections on gas. And they couldn't just get one. So they had about 4 consultants to help them. And they could have just used the EIA number. And it's the same one that Entergy is using in their other jurisdictions. So I would check to make sure we're not being billed the full amount and they're billing it in every jurisdiction, but it's the same one. So a couple of the firms that I recognize were S&P Global, which is pretty good. I mean, I've done interviews with them and they seem to be pretty good, but I don't know their work products. IHS Markit is well known. It has Dan Jorgen's old Cambridge Energy Associates. And I told them after they responded that as much as I admired Jurgen, I could point to the studies of that group, and they have a client bias. In other words, you can't be a consultant with energy without having a client bias. It just doesn't exist. I know because I've been offered huge amounts of money from electric utilities, and because I wouldn't toe the line, I've never actually consummated any of these offers. So that is a bias. Also, if you look at the stochastic analysis, the risks on the long-term price of gas are all on the low side. How could that be? A baseline case, the risk is on both sides. So if energy comes in and says, well, the IRA incentives for solar are going to go away, well, then if they want to introduce the new administration policies, McKibben had a really good article today about apparently the president is negotiating that he won't put tariffs on certain nations if they start importing huge amounts of liquefied natural gas. I have been somewhat of a skeptic that it would have that big of a impact on prices. But if that's the policy of the United States, then we're talking about a whole different ballgame. And so there's a lot of risk on the upside cost to consumers. So I wouldn't plan to initiate that, but if they start saying, well, administration policies is going to improve the economics of natural gas, I think there's a good response to that. Another thing is that if you read what they're doing in Georgia, take the Michoud facility, for instance, if they have batteries there, huge battery storage, they can buy imported power cheap, and they can deploy it expensive. And there are a lot of things you can do with batteries to improve grid reliability. So the big picture is, are we headed in a direction that's solar battery oriented or one that's natural gas oriented? The way I read it, Entergy favors the natural gas approach. I think they're going to be behind the curve. It's going to be bad economics and bad for the environment. The last thing I will say is, one thing that really opened my eyes, and I urge everybody to do this, is to read the Entergy plan, which they try to snow you. We got stochastic analysis, and our models are giving all these things, and we've got 50 acronyms, some of which we never even bothered to identify in the document. So Entergy's got their IRP up for approval in Arkansas right now. And look at it. Compared to Entergy New Orleans, it's a beautiful document. Now, I would have things, I think it's too conservative, but it's clearly written. There's almost no jargon, very few acronyms. The charts are much more legible and easier to read. And as you know from sitting in on that meeting, the lay audience that was in the public hearing, they were almost crying because the document could not be understood except by people who spend most of their time thinking about these things. So I think with the council, that could be a strong argument, and they won't do it because it would take a half hour. But if the council members actually read the plan for Entergy Arkansas and compared it to the plan for Entergy New Orleans, they would be ashamed, because they're not even in the same ballpark. The one in Arkansas is so much better. So the question is, why is it so much better? And they're not even as vulnerable to climate change as poor New Orleans is. We're on the battlefront. Our insurance costs are going to go up a lot more than theirs. So these are all issues we could spend days talking about. But I think with the council, we have to point out that Entergy has a history of hyping gas and underestimating solar and batteries, and that they haven't even tried to produce a document that communicates effectively with the public. That's my comments. Sorry for rambling.
I, I think it's actually really telling that one of the only Entergy companies that has so much really local presence, that has public meetings as part of its IRP process, that has city council that should be a lot more attentive than potentially the Arkansas Commission, that Entergy has chosen to be far more uh, opaque about their intentions and about the plan itself. And that means that the city council has a responsibility to urge them to do something different and to catch up to their partners or their co-Entergy companies.
Amen.
Thank you both. Any other questions?
I think we had one question from before, from Elizabeth and Sam. It was about where the hydrogen is from. I think that's referring to like where Entergy. All right, there we go.
That's the big answer. A shrug. Yeah, that really is the issue. Where is this hydrogen coming from? And how much is it going to cost? It's a big unknown, and major effect on bills and future costs and all sorts of things.
But
Yeah,
what's
I think clearly we're going to reach a decision point where they're showing us that they're going to make this argument that we should build gas because it can co-fire with hydrogen. And I agree with Ned, whose father I actually knew fairly well in the day. So the burden of proof should be on them to demonstrate why this is a smart thing to do, rather than us having to argue why it's not a smart thing to do. And so in the burden of proof, they would have to tell us what kind of hydrogen it is and also explain what the advantages of it is. If you read the Arkansas plan, they kind of dismiss hydrogen because they say, well, we'd have to put in a whole delivery infrastructure, which is kind of obvious to us. But if you're reading the Entergy New Orleans plan, it kind of looks like the hydrogen just sort of appears from someplace and it's there to be used, which is totally ridiculous. And I've seen this used that the hydrogen people used to come into DOE in the 1990s and they would bring in a fuel cell and they would run it for people at the department, usually the political appointees, and show how there was no pollution from running this fuel cell without ever pointing out that hydrogen did not exist in isolation in nature. Uh, and everybody was falling for it. The George W. Bush administration fell for it. They shut down research in all automobile efficiency techniques and put it all on fuel cells. And I and several others at the time. So this is ridiculous. So I think all of Ned's points are excellent, but we shouldn't be in the position that we have to prove it's not a good idea. The ball is in their court to prove it, and they just time to be they're just saying, oh, there's an advantage to co-firing with hydrogen. Well, tell us what that advantage is.
There was oh, Jesse, did you want to answer the buy low, sell high battery question?
I did not see that question.
Lane, I think, dropped a question about what it means to use a battery to buy cheap and sell expensive. And that's to do with the fact that the cost to buy energy on the open market, the spot price, changes throughout the day. And often during the middle of the day, or actually here in New Orleans, closer to the end of the afternoon, energy is at its most expensive, as opposed to 2 or 3 in the morning when everybody is asleep and not running all kinds of things, right? And so that means that if you have a battery during the time in the evenings when when the power is really inexpensive on the market, the utility could purchase that power, bank it in the battery, and then use it again the following afternoon when the power is much more expensive. Does that help?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that because they sold the Rice plant, which is from a technical standpoint, a very technically advanced gas peaker. Also happens to be extraordinarily expensive, but it responds in 10 minutes, which is quite good for, well, it's the best for a fossil fuel plant. What they don't mention in the plan is batteries respond in seconds, and even that's it's a little quicker than that, actually. So when you can do the kind of trading that Logan's talking about over a 24-hour period, but you can also make little tweaks all the way as you go along. And you can also protect the grid better because if something comes up unexpectedly, you can deal with it extremely rapidly. And that's why, in some ways, right now, the solar farms are almost more exciting than solar. I mean, there's a lot of people around the world working on batteries right now. And when you have state in a car battery or a phone battery, you kind of have to use lithium. But in a utility application, when you have a larger battery, there's less need for lithium because you've got the space to use other things. So the battery costs, despite what Entergy says, are going to be coming down quite rapidly. And other utilities are picking up on that, including ones that are under, the Georgia Public Service Commission is all Republicans. That they actually, I know several of them, but they're pro-solar, but they're not, what I would call environmentalists. And they've gotten the message on this. So, I think the council, if they will take the time to listen, would not want to be a laggard, to other things that are going on. We're not talking about trying to be California.
Any other questions?
Thank you for keeping us up to date. I really appreciate it because I don't follow this on a regular basis and got to get up to speed.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for taking time out of your Thursday evening to be here with us.
Okay. I know. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Hope we'll see you at the meeting on February 26th.
We'll have all these documents and resources up on our website so you can access them and share them with your friends and family.
Yeah.
We had one more question from Lane.
Oh,
Yeah.
Lane, I missed it.
I was just in through all of this, I have this tremendous. I mean, I kind of know what the answer is, but there's not really any emphasis on solar, or nor is there any. Does there seem to be any pressure to get solar power sources integrated onto the grid? And they aren't, isn't that right? They're not now well integrated, so that we can build all the solar banks we want, but if we can't get it into the grid, it doesn't do anybody any good. That's just so wasteful and stupid. So my question is, with all this little talk about how, the charts earlier, and yes, I thank you, I will go onto your website and look for the documents there, but the sources that show that there's this tiny amount of our energy that is supplied by solar, isn't that basically not so much because there isn't the capacity to generate solar, but because there's nobody's pushing to get it into the grid? Is that fair?
So there are a couple of questions. There are a couple of pieces to that.
Yeah.
Louisiana has moved very, very slowly, and by that I mean Entergy has moved very, very slowly to build solar or purchase solar. One of the ways that they have hindered the expansion of large utility scale solar, much less community scale solar, is by underbuilding and underinvesting in the transmission system that is able to move, large scale, high voltage power from a solar farm outside of New Orleans, for example, into New Orleans, or from North Louisiana down here. Our transmission grid is criminally inadequate for a renewable system. But also outside of New Orleans, the rules around people having solar for themselves, either on their home or through community solar, again, there have been policy blockades against it, largely at the Public Service Commission. The fact is, if we wanted to have the renewable energy that we know that we all need to protect ourselves in our future and reduce our bills and all of this, we need regulators who are willing to push the utility to require them to build the system that is beneficial for us and not just for their bottom line and their shareholders. So that is why we always really encourage folks to let your city council members, your public service commissioners know how important it is that they require, that they insist, demand, and set accountability metrics for these kinds of policies and for these kinds of measures. Because without that, the utilities simply won't.
Thank you, Logan.
Thanks everyone for
Anything
your
else?
great questions. Yeah, I think final call on questions. Did we get to everyone? The Alliance is also always around. You can shoot us an email or give us a phone call. I'm going to drop that information in the chat. And we, like Logan said, will be sharing the presentation as well as the resources from the chat with folks.
Thanks again, y'all.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks so much.